All right, good afternoon. Welcome to Supply Chain Now Radio. We are broadcasting live today from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Scott Luton. I'm your host for today's session. In our webinar today, we're going to be focusing on a topic that we hear questions about almost daily. How do we better engage millennials, which make up now at least a plurality of the workforce, if not the majority just yet? And to help us walk through this conversation, I'm excited to have Greg White with us here today. Greg is CEO of Curo, a growing technology firm based right here in Atlanta. And we'll talk more about Greg's background in just a moment. But as always, we're glad to have you with us here today on Supply Chain Now Radio.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
You bet. Glad to have you, Greg. So let's tackle our ground rules. So first off, all attendees will be on mute. We're looking to optimize the audio experience. Now, with that said, let's make it as interactive as possible. So please do submit your questions via the chat toolbar. We'll answer as many as we have time for at the conclusion of today's webinar. And finally, a PDF of today's presentation and recording will be sent out in the next few days to each of our registrants. All right, so let's take a minute to recognize our sponsors here on Supply Chain Now Radio. Big thanks to our sponsor, Apex Atlanta, which has been serving the Metro Atlanta community since 1964. For those of you new to Apex, it is the premier industry association dedicated to end-to-end supply chain management around the world. Our organization serves over 45,000 members. Apex offers membership and professional development, a wide range of education opportunities, industry-leading research and publications, and widely recognized professional certifications. To learn more, visit us at apexatlanta.org. And big thanks to our sponsor, TalentStream, a WeBank certified recruiting and staffing firm that specializes in helping organizations find top talent in the engineering, manufacturing, and supply chain space. Did you know TalentStream has averaged a 45-day time to fill on its core job searches in 2018? Contact them today to put that V8 search engine to work for your organization. To learn more, visit us at talentstreamstaffing.com. All right, now we get to the featured speaker. And to our audience, you probably heard Greg weigh in as if he were in the same room this morning, and that is because he is.
Yes.
We as our webinar programming continues in studio, rising high on the 45th floor of our downtown Atlanta headquarter building. I'm kidding. But as our webinar programming continues to evolve, we actually are doing a remote broadcast with our presenters in the room today. So really looking forward to a fun and frank and helpful conversation. So with no further ado, let me share some information about our featured speaker today. So Greg White is CEO of Curo, and I can tell you that he is passionate about Curo's mission to connect the digital workforce and eliminate workplace communication chaos. Raise your hand if that sounds familiar, right? In Greg's 20-year career, he has guided companies dedicated to improving the operational performance for professionals both in the office and the field. Prior to Curo, Greg founded supply chain planning company Blue Ridge and served as president and CEO for what is a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader. Blue Ridge has had an incredible story. And that company helps other companies, balance inventory with customer demand, an ever-present problem in supply chain. Greg has also held leadership roles with Servigistics, which is now PTC, and E3 Corporation, which is now JDA Software. He's led transformations at more than 100 companies, including Amazon, Ace Hardware, REI, Williams-Sonoma, and many more. I left off those others because I couldn't pronounce those names. Greg. I'm kidding. On a personal note, I first met Greg when we were both serving on the Georgia Logistics Summit Executive Committee earlier this year. And I'll tell you, we had just launched a veterans initiative to raise funds to pay for more than 100 veterans to get them out to the summit, further their careers, make some connections, help them network. And the very first business leader that raised their hand and personally covered the registrations of 10 of these vets was none other than Greg White, and I'm always very appreciative of that. And on a side note, we went on to bring out about 101 veterans to the summit and to help them further their career. So wow. We could have done that without Greg's early support. He's also volunteered as part of our Supply Chain 101 program, where we're taking teams of volunteers into elementary schools to talk supply chain career opportunities. So if you can't tell, I'm a big member of the local Greg White fan club. And with that said, here's Mr. Greg White.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. Proper shout out to the Curo team who helped, helped us fund the veterans to the Georgia Logistics Summit. We felt like that was our higher purpose, and that's part of what we're going to talk about today. Is what is your higher purpose, and how do organizations enable that capability in other companies or in other people. So let's talk about this millennial generation. So it's a question that I get frequently. What do we do about millennials? So I've worked for many years with many customers, many partners, many companies, and of late, in the last 4 or 5 years, this has become a big question: is what do we do about millennials, as if there is something wrong with them and we have to fix them, right? So, the first thing I want people to recognize is, one, I have some experience with millennials. I have 2 daughters who are millennials. I have one that's iGen, and if you think you got problems with millennials, just wait. But look, the thing that is important for us to recognize is it's not them. It isn't them, and there isn't even really a them. If you think about your respective generations out there, you're not the same as everyone else in your generation. Not all Gen Xers or baby boomers or silent generation, a generation that's so silent people don't even know it exists. Not all of them are the same. And in fact, many of them have tendencies that we see now manifesting in this millennial generation. And in truth, if we want to wonder what to do about millennials, we should have been wondering a long time ago, because we, Generation X largely, and the silent generation, are the parents of these quote-unquote kids, right? So we have to think about it from that perspective. There is diversity among any generation. I mean, let's look at it this way. The oldest of the millennial generation are 36 years old, and the youngest are 18. So obviously there's going to be a lot of difference between those two. And I can tell you that in my 2 that are only about 5.5 years separated, there's a significant difference there. The changes have been coming fast and furious in the last few years. And in the last decade and a half or so, since we've moved out of the millennial generation being born and the next generation being born, the changes are coming even faster. So anywhere from these 36-year-old kids to mobile millennials who are, as we know, I mean, there's no way to deny it, on their phone a lot. There's a lot of diversity there. So the unfortunate fact, since we understand that millennials aren't really just a group that we can lump together and sensationalize, though that has largely been done, that's really a function of our society and where our society is today, because we love to sensationalize and generalize. But it's not them, it's us. And more specifically, it's really our perception. We're not the problem either. We, being the older generations, are not the problem any more than they're the problem. It's a perception thing, and that's what this, the awakening for me was in dealing with my own kids and in dealing with millennials over the last 3 companies that I've worked with, and the vast differences that I have seen between kids of that generation. So what really needs to change is that perception, and that's really what this presentation is all about. So again, I wish I had a nickel for every time I've heard this question, what to do about millennials, but in truth, it's been said about every generation. On the right here is our generation, Scott, Generation X.
The best generation.
Yes, our parents would probably argue, but imagine what they must have thought. They thought shaved heads and anarchy, which was essentially the rallying cry of Generation X. The point there is that every generation has a perception by the previous generation. So the thing we have to recognize is that generational change is natural. It's constant. And it's something that everyone has to adapt to. It's something that millennials have to adapt to that transition as much as we have to adapt to that transition. And the real truth is, and what we really need to talk about here is, what does it mean to the workforce, right? So millennials are the first generation that are digital natives, right? Even though that's the case, if you think about the people today that aren't millennials, how many of us are on our phones or using technology or automation to get things done today, and how many of us, particularly I think in Generation X, have been fighting the tide to get the world to a more technologically advanced and an automated space. I mean, that's really where we started. When we first got computers, we were in junior high or high school, right? Millennials were born with an Apple in the house.
Oregon Trail, the Apple IIe.
Yeah.
Those are some
compact.
Yeah, that's right. A floppy disk for the size of the table here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But, you know, technology is what really defines this, has really defined this generation. And their adoption of it, their use, arguably overuse of technology, is what really defines them. So we're going to talk a lot about technology and what that means to this generation. But hey, look, let's face it. We built this generation ourselves, so there's not anything here that we shouldn't be at least subconsciously familiar with, right? How to manage this organization. So who are these kids, right? Like I said, they're born between 82 and 2000. The next generation is called iGen. They, like millennials, grew up with as digital natives. iGen has grown up with iPhone in their, in their memory history. So
I was about to ask you, iGen, does Apple have a trademark on that yet?
No, I think somebody snagged that before they could. We'll have to look at the URL. They represent about 38% of the workforce. That's 56 million workers, right? That's significant. In just 2 years, they're going to be over half of the workforce, and by 2025, they're going to be 3/4 of the workforce. Between 2025 and 2030, it depends on the transition of the previous generations. But they are all about technology. I mean, they communicate with technology. They work with technology. They have the expectation that technology isn't just available, but it creates efficiencies in how they work and how they live their lives. Look, these are a generation who want to be highly engaged by what they do, right? They have an incredible sense of mission. Everything is a mission or a project, it seems like. They're team players, and because of the way they were raised and taught and coached, they have an incredible sense of team spirit. This notion of a grand statement, right? Make something of your life. Making a grand statement is a big thing for them. They're very active in social issues. We had Save the Whales, right, for our generation. Now it's Save Everything for this generation. Their attention span can be a bit of an issue, obviously because of the world that we live in. But honestly, they talked about that with Generation X as well, that MTV, if anyone remembers when MTV still had music, MTV was reducing people's attention span because there were all these short snippets happening on that platform. So,
Greg, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Since you've got two millennials at home, they're beyond some of these dynamics behind this generation that you're sharing here. We all know the stigma that persists out there.
Yep.
What is your observation on their take on these stigmas?
Of their take, I think they kind of laugh it off. I mean, I can tell you that they laugh about it. We talk about it a lot,
really,
in our home and at work, and we, our workplace is very homey. We interact a lot with each other's families, so it's very interesting how that happens. But I think they largely laugh it off. They laugh at themselves. Like anyone else, they tend to point at someone else and go, "That's a typical millennial," but not me, right?
Well, we were talking in the warm up, and I wish I remembered who shared this quote with me. But we all have a little bit of millennial in us, right?
Yeah.
Regardless if it's any of the attributes you just went with. There are some generalizations. Some of them are more accurate than others, but truly, we all have some of these tendencies that make us more or a little bit less millennial. So we try to be careful with some of some of the
generalizations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to reiterate, it's mostly a perception. It's not a reality. In our office, we have a 36-year-old millennial and a 23-year-old millennial. I have a 27 now millennial. Happy birthday, Deb. And a 21-year-old millennial and a 16-year-old iGen. So I feel like I've got good experience, and I have seen all over the board, who these people are and what they're about. I mean, some are unbelievably high achievers. They fear nothing, and I think that's a great place for us to be, particularly because of the transition in the workplace and the inevitable and necessary transition to a more technology-oriented, even automated workplace. So there are a lot of good aspects of that are off the charts. And like I said, I hate generalizing about an entire generation. There are some other things that are important to think about. They don't have the ability to read visual and verbal cues a lot, and we're going to talk about how to handle that in a short bit. But because they're heads down so often, some things that are obvious to us are not as obvious to them. A quick story: as I said, I have a daughter who's a millennial, and I was giving her a tidbit of wisdom. She didn't quite get it. I felt like I'd explained it pretty clearly, and I pulled out an old Benjamin Franklinism and said, "A word to the wise is sufficient." And her response to me was, "What the hell does that mean?" Not let me think about that. Because of the technology and, again, of the times that we're in, response is instantaneous. And I think we're going to talk about how to coach millennials to think a little more before they respond. And, of course, they're heavy communicators, and inputs and outputs, multiple inputs and outputs, they don't fear that. So I think, you alluded to this earlier, Scott, and that is that this isn't all about millennials. Millennials are the biggest force in what the real news is, which is this incredible workforce transition. If you think about it, baby boomers are leaving the workforce at 10,000 per day. They are literally the largest generation in the history of the planet. No generation approaches the size, even remotely approaches the size of the baby boomer generation. So what we're really talking about here is workforce transition, and that's why it's so important to understand the generation that will shortly make up 3/4 of the workforce. You just have to know that. And that's really what we hope to impart to everyone today, is that ability, that knowledge, at least a high-level game plan to be able to manage this workforce transition, because it's as much about capturing what baby boomers know and having Gen Xers help manage that transition as it is imparting that transition to millennials. That's
a great point, Greg, and to illustrate some of the challenge here. So if you look at the supply chain industry, we all know there's a bunch of growth, right? It's in this global business environment that's never going to go away. Huge need for qualified talent just with the growth of the sector. And then you talked about there 10,000 baby boomers that are leaving the workforce every day. Not all of those in supply chain, but I guarantee a bunch of them are.
Yep.
So we're seeing on both ends a ton of pressure being brought to the table. And then if you look at some of the numbers that DHL put out in a piece a year and some change ago, depending on what study you look at, you've got, when you consider openings in the supply chain space and how many qualified candidates, you've got anywhere from 6 to 9 openings per qualified supply chain candidate that we're facing. And we wonder why we got this talent gap, skills gap, call it what you will, but
right.
But all the more reason to really understand this critical generation. Right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that really makes the point there. That is an unapproachable gap, right? Whether we have 11% of the people we need or 16% of the people we need to fill those roles, it can't be done. It is inevitable that those will not be filled, and therefore automation is necessary and inevitable, and because of the high levels of requirement for safeties and the high cost of healthcare and various and sundry, and when you have that kind of skills gap, then wages become very, very high. So you have to manage that with automation. And the beautiful thing about that is there will both be enough jobs for millennials, and there will be automation and technology embraced in the workplace. There just have to be. And I think millennials, they don't fear automation, right? Whereas
they're fearless, like you said earlier.
The prior generations feared automation taking their jobs. I think millennials understand better that automation and technology augment and enhance their jobs. In fact, they do. 3/4 of them believe that automation and technology enhances their productivity in the workplace, and that's a critical transition in terms of perspective on the workplace. And so they will facilitate and they will accelerate the march to technology better than any generation in history, and they recognize that they will still keep their jobs because of it. Our kids don't not have friends because they have Instagram. They have more friends, arguably some better than others, but they have more friends because of Instagram or whatever the technology of the day is, right? So, so they get how human interaction and technological interaction enhance the world. Let me throw a couple stats out there because there are a couple things that I'd like to address as regards the workforce. One, we're at the highest employment we've had in 18 years, right? And even though we're and because we're at that highest level, we still have people putting human jobs out there. Those people are going to recognize eventually. Those companies need to recognize that for the purpose of being able to get those jobs done, again, to do them safely, right, and to do them at a reasonable cost, that this automation and technology is necessary. And again, this is the best generation ever to be able to approach it. If you think about Mike Rowe's Dirty Jobs initiative, right, he is big on this skills gap thing. And those aren't all college jobs. And the beautiful thing is that these new generations, they aren't afraid to not go to college to take a job that really needs to be fulfilled. And in some cases, you can see where some of the generalizations that we make about this generation are perfect for that. We need plumbers, we need welders, we need we need HVAC technicians. Somebody's got to work on the cars. We need all kinds of those jobs filled as well as executive jobs filled. And some of those fit the lifestyle that these up and coming generations want. Be at work when you're at work and not at work when you're not, right? If you're going to run a company, let me assure you people, if you are going to run a company, you are at work even when you're not at work. So there are a lot of those jobs that fit the working style of these upcoming generations. So those are so critical.
Great point. And we had a webinar earlier this week on artificial intelligence, and I want to touch on something you just talked about, Greg, because the speakers there, Sri Rajagapalan and Jerry Kopecki, made a point of sharing with our audience that AI and these other innovations is not about human replacement. It's about human enhancement.
Right.
And I think the generation, one of the greatest strengths about millennials, which is one of the points you're making, is they embrace that because It's all about working smarter and not harder if we can. It still creates more opportunity because it creates growth. It creates company growth. It creates opportunities. What was the quote on the mission, the grand mission? It helps.
Grand statement, right?
Yeah, it helps create a bigger vehicle for others to get on board there. So anyway, I think what was being shared Tuesday in that webinar really dovetails nicely with your message here.
Yep.
Don't be fearful of this technology. Figure out how to use it, engage it, and grow with it.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And that's what we have to do. That's the transition we have to make because millennials are comfortable with that. We have to get comfortable with that. I think Generation X is largely comfortable with that, but we have to know when it's time to hand over the reins. And we essentially have to be work parents for this generation, right? We have to help them learn what the workplace is and should be like. And I think they'll teach us as well, because there are things that need to change in the workplace dramatically that this millennial generation can teach us. Yeah, so our friends at Forbes, they wrote I think a very insightful article about the millennial generation, and as they said, it's the most studied generation in history. That's hard to believe. isn't it? I mean, I guess maybe because there's such a great ability to study things, but the baby boomer generation was such a huge impact on the planet.
Yeah, the greatest generation. You know, we were kidding earlier about the competitiveness between generations, and I was just kidding. But you think about what they had to face, what they were challenged with. You know, they didn't have message boards and social media to complain about certain things that they were tasked with doing. They went out there and did it at a huge cost, and made, you know, our country and the world what it is today.
Yeah.
You know? So anyway, back to your point.
Well, so I you know, what Forbes addressed here, and I think the two key points here are to talk about how millennials were taught and coached this whole notion of personal best and group dynamics. So I think what that has left a number of millennials with, again, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I've seen it, and I've seen that they need to be coached here. I can't even count on all my hands and well, I can't count on my phone how many millennials that I've worked with, but you know, this notion of personal best is not the best. It's be the best you can be, and in some way that leaves them sometimes short of trying to be the best. So there's some coaching that's required there to help them be better than even they perceive they can be. That is what our generation was challenged with. I think maybe over challenged with, but there is an aspect of that is very, very healthy. Be better than you think you can be, right? Strive for more. That grand statement, if you want to make a grand statement, you've got to do more than you think you can do, right? Martin Luther King wasn't a great man because at some point he said, wow, that's all I can do. You know, you have, and we have to impart that knowledge to them. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. This whole notion of group dynamics, they're great teammates. Millennials are great teammates. And as, you know, as we've talked about, you know, we have to integrate all of these generations and get them working together because we need to capture the knowledge that the baby boomer generation has, and we need to transform that knowledge into something that millennials can use to really make a change in how work is done, how things get done, how the world is done and shaped, right? Because there is a lot of value in it, in a generation that just knows things. So much of what baby boomers know isn't necessarily written down. They just know.
So on that, the notion of change, Greg, and I can't remember, you may know it, but there's an old adage that computing power leaps ahead every 18 months, I believe. I'm going to have the time frame.
Yeah.
Would you argue that in this day and age where there's so much, we're in such the digital technology age, that old adage is more relevant now in terms of the rate of change? And
I've seen it. Yeah, I think we've all seen it, whether we've consciously acknowledged it or not. The rate of change, whether it's hardware, computing power, or communication capability, you know, it's changing at an incredibly rapid pace
every day.
Right.
It speeds up.
Twitter for news, right? I mean, you know,
characters.
Twitter for a safety message. If you think about what's going on in the world, I mean, not just our president, and you know, we know what he's thinking every moment of the day, right? But you think about emergencies and events that are happening around the world. You think about knowing where things are happening. I mean, you can literally look at your phone and see where someone is who's talking to you. If you have Snapchat or whatever, you can look and say, that person is pinging me from Abu Dhabi, right? Whatever. So
do you feel that the millennial generation, back to your point earlier about all the different folks in this generation you've worked with and you've led and you've worked beside in the trenches and all, do they embrace this rate of change differently than some of the others? Do you think?
More naturally.
Yeah,
they don't even think of it as a rate of change. They just think of it as the way things are. It is so natural to them that, you know, and I think when you're caught up in something that's such a great change, you just go with it. I think many people do that. If you think about so many generations and so many situations that you've lived through, all of you out there have lived through, when you're going through it, it just is what it is. So I think you've got, it's so natural for them. All of these inputs. So actually on this next slide, we're going to talk about this, right? So how do I engage millennials? So I think, the one thing to do is indulge that need and capitalize on that need to make a grand statement, to have a higher purpose, right? Give them a higher purpose in their work. So one of the things that we've done at the companies that I've run in the past that we've done so well is to identify that higher purpose. We're not here to build software. We are here to improve people's work, home, whatever, their lives, their work, their job satisfaction, to give them some of their day back. That's what we do mostly at Curo today is we give people much of their day back. And even in the workday, we make it a better workday. So if you think about that as a higher purpose, man, that's a good reason to come to work, isn't it? Not just we're going to sell some software today. And capitalize again on those opportunities to make them into a team player. They love getting together and they're very good at it. They did their homework together. They did their homework in groups in high school. So they're very familiar with how to work with a group and how to capitalize on that group dynamic to make to make things happen.
And speaking, working on a team, back to this global business environment where you're working on more and more diverse teams, global teams. You said Abu Dhabi, your supplier, who knows where it is, right?
And who cares?
Right, and who cares? But maybe different values, different cultural norms.
Right. Being
able to absorb that, embrace it, respect it,
yep,
and get stuff done.
Yeah.
Right?
Again, it's just natural. It's just a part of the world, right? It's just a part of the world that they and we have lived in for many years. They're somewhat more aware of it. But, the other things that I think you can do, this one is so critical, man. You have to leverage this because millennials are used to a lot of inputs. They are doing their homework while FaceTiming, and I can vouch for this. I knocked, but I entered anyway because it's my house. They're used to doing their homework while they're FaceTiming and Instagramming at the same time, and they're somehow getting it done. They are somehow getting it done. So they don't fear multiple inputs or multiple projects at a time. Give them that because they thrive on it, and what my experience has been and what I've seen in research is that they are very, very good at it. You can't throw enough chaos. You can't throw enough projects at a millennial. And if you do, they are mature enough and they're open. And I think, Scott, earlier you used the term transparency, maybe when we were talking offline, but they are so transparent that if it's more than they can handle, they'll let you know. You will never wonder. So that's a beautiful thing. And I think, one of the other things you've got to do is, and we've talked about technology a lot here, but you've got to indulge that technology bias. These last 2 points, are critical. One is, and they're critical, and they are in direct opposition with one another. You have to indulge that technology bias. You have to enable them with technology that that they're familiar with, that can do the job, that can help them enhance it, because 3/4 of what's about to be 3/4 of the workforce believes that they can be more effective, more efficient with technology.
But they're not scared of figuring things out.
That's right.
I think in my experience, Lisa and Greg, I'm curious if you're seeing the same thing. YouTube, the first thing when we're confronted with a new technology or a new tool,
yep,
see if there's a YouTube on that.
Yep.
And learn it, over 5 minutes and then start applying it. Do you find that's very common within?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't think of it until a few years ago, but as I encourage my daughters to find resources outside their school to help them with schoolwork, they started doing that. And so I've started doing that. And honestly, that's one of the things we've put in our product at Curo is we have the ability for us to, we talked about capturing the baby boomers' knowledge, capture the knowledge of who's doing the job today and impart that knowledge on whoever is going to be doing it in the future. And a video guideline or guidance in the solution is a great tool. It's impossible to make a mistake. It's just like learning how to change your oil with a video.
And Will earlier, the lead evangelist at Backbeat Marketing, big friend of the show, Will mentioned Wikipedia. Folks are using that very similar to YouTube. In fact, we might need a Willipedia.
Yeah,
we need to work on that. We'll figure out all things
supply chain, marketing, and music.
Yes,
exactly. That's right. Southern supply chain and Southern rock all on one site. I love it. And then this is again a juxtaposition to their technology bias, but it's critical. You have to mentor them on human interaction. They don't, the example I gave before, subtlety, visual cues, verbal cues can be lost on them. So make a very conscious and intentional effort to get millennials looking at you and understanding what you're saying by reading visual cues. So we, one of the things we talked about is how I think technology that's the hard skill that we need to capture and that we need to have a new perspective on to give them. So technology needs to be familiar to them. It needs to be in a format. And digital doesn't mean just a web page or digital certainly doesn't mean green screen. I'm not even sure most people out there know what green screen is, but it certainly doesn't mean what SAP and products like that look like. It means familiar. It means rapid, easy, simple, robust, but simple to use, right? And that's, I use Zillow as an example here because that's a methodology we've sort of modeled off of, but it puts the relevant information in front of you and then allows you to manage through it. So, as I said, you need to be able to, because again, millennials can do this. You need to be able to translate interfaces from how you would use it on a day-to-day basis to how you can use it in the workplace. Millennials can envision how you could use Instagram or Snapchat in the workplace, and we need to as well. We need to facilitate that, and technology is going to need to and will change in order to facilitate that. So that's some of what we've done. We allow people to know where their workers are through an app, to know where the work is through an app, to understand where on a map or on on the floor plan of their building or wherever they need to go pick this up or fix that or that sort of thing. So that works very, very well for this generation. And we're not just taking an old functionality and putting it on a phone. We're actually thinking about the psyche of this millennial and the next generation and how to optimize their work, and we're getting a ton of input for that as well.
Real quick point of order to our audience. We are approaching Q&A in the next 5 or 10 minutes or so. So definitely, if you've got questions, we've got a couple submitted to us already. We're going to tackle those here at the end. So feel free, by all means, to submit questions. We'll pose those to Greg White towards the conclusion of the webinar. So please continue on.
Yeah, sure. So, it's funny that you mentioned the whole YouTube video thing. That's one of the things that we think is really critical. And I think it's important to train and educate and enable this workforce in the way that they've become accustomed to. And that's a critical part of transition in this workplace. Honestly, I think everyone could learn from it. It's just that it's not natural for us Gen Xers and baby boomers and whoever else to go to YouTube. But if it's there, if you present it there, if you present the training there, that's the way to do it. People don't want to learn in classrooms, and they don't want to learn in writing either, because it's so much easier and more effective to learn with a video that literally shows you how to do it. You can pause it and stop and do the part you've just learned and then move on.
And a lot of what you're sharing there is having a tremendous ripple effect out in the education industry, so to speak, whether it's universities, whether it's professional training and certification like Apex offers. We've seen a huge surge in on-demand training for folks earning their certification. So every organization is dealing with some of these dynamics you're describing.
No doubt. No doubt. So look, I think the important thing to think about is it's not really what to do about millennials, as if we have to compensate for something that's wrong with them or shortcomings. Really, the main message here is that organizations and the current workforce leadership need to figure out how to expose and enable and reveal and empower the gifts that millennials have, And to me, that's some self-awareness, right? Again, training them how to interact verbally and visually in person. I think that's still very, very important. And we have that realization every day. We taught one of our millennials how to negotiate in person, and she did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And
is there a story there you can share, Greg?
Yeah. So
put you on the spot on that.
Yeah, no worries. It's fun. So she's actually a very analytical type and loathes any direct interaction, even on the phone. And we had somebody come in that was pitching us something, and we decided we wanted it, but I'm maybe this is old school, but I decided I never pay full price. So I said, this is the price you can say yes to. Now I'm going to leave the room. And she got to a point where the counter was about $500 a month or whatever from where we wanted to be, and came and found me in the office and said, they're at this point. And I said, tell them you couldn't find me, but that you can agree. You have the authority to agree at this point, at the price that we gave him first. And after some hemming and hawing and a little cajoling on my part, she went back and she got it. And it was so impressive to me for her to be able to do that. I mean, it took guts. It would have taken me guts to go back and ask for that discount. And she went back and asked for another discount, and she got it. So
wow. Kudos to her.
Yeah, and thanks to her.
And probably a big lesson learned for her that's going to, again, kind of ripple out across her career, right?
Yeah,
she's going to be more confident in the next negotiation cycle.
Yeah, I do hope so. And I think so too. So anyway, that's really what we've got to do is we have to adapt. We, being the elder statespeople of the workforce, we have to adapt our perception, and we have to adapt our approach, and we have to enable with technology. So aside from mentoring, those are the things that we can do that really make this a sensible transition in the workforce.
And it's all about better engagement. If you look at any study out there, the engagement of any generational employee, a lot of organizations are struggling. This was more focused on the millennial generation, which folks seem to be struggling more, right?
More outwardly. Yeah, I'm not sure more, right? I'm not sure it's more, but I think it's more outwardly, yeah.
Good point. Point. Okay, so now we are moving into Q&A mode. So we've got Greg White here, who's tackled a ton of his career, very helpful insight and expertise. And now we get him for the next 15 minutes, ask him any question in the world, even ask him more about his negotiation best practices and tips and tricks. So we've got a couple of questions teed up, and I'm going to get to those here. So the first question comes from Jamar. So Jamar asks, not to be judgmental, but in your experience.
Wow, that's a tough opening, isn't it?
It is a tough opening. Not to be judgmental, but in your experience, does this generation really want to work? Wow, Jamar.
Wow, do I hear that a lot. So what our product does at Curo is it's a task management solution. So we have companies who are using it for manufacturing processes, what I like to say, anywhere from dirty jobs to nerdy jobs. So we have one of our favorite customers does erosion control, and everybody has experienced that, whether they know it or not. That's those black fences that they put on the side of the road whenever a construction project is going on. Everybody knows that. And the seed and stuff that they throw down on the side of the road. So the CEO of that company actually asked me that question, and a number of members. And I've been asked that question a lot. And the truth is, yes, they do want to work. That question is often asked that directly, by the way.
Wow.
They do want to work. They do want to work differently. And again, that's what this is really about, Jamar, is we've got to adapt to how they want to work. And I think if you take some of those cues, giving them a higher purpose, right, enabling them with technology and giving them some insight on how to interact with people, those are the three most important, in my opinion. If you can do that, then you will get good work out of any generation.
So I want to piggyback up on Jamar's question, because in supply chain, you're just making a comment of how that question was asked, right? No nonsense, very direct.
Yes.
No time for finesse and diplomacy, all that stuff. Well, the world of supply chain where we are with the details, things need to happen quick.
Yep.
How do you see millennials embracing kind of the peculiarities, if I can say that, another cup of coffee, of the supply chain space and this no-nonsense type of mentality that persists?
I don't think it bothers them one bit. I see them embracing it. And, again, this is a group they are very aware of diversity. And that's not just social diversity or racial diversity. It's also diversity of style.
Right. Emotional intelligence.
Right.
How we're all geared. And,
Exactly. They recognize that and they can deal with that very naturally. So, and at the same time, if they disagree with you, they will not hesitate to call you out.
That's right.
And I
think
think
more of that.
I agree with that. We particularly need more of that. Yeah. So.
All right. So, Jamar, great question there. Next question. And again, to our audience, I've got 12:45 Eastern time here in the Supply Chain City. We're going to take questions for the next 10 minutes or so. So, please use this opportunity to pose your questions to Greg White with Curo. Next question comes from Sheila. And Sheila asks, when engaging with millennials online without visual cues, what do you suggest to get their attention openly?
To get their attention openly?
Yep. Let's see. Let me reread that.
Yeah, please do. Maybe my attention span's too short. Multi-generational.
Greg's nickname is Goldfish. When engaging with millennials online without visual cues, what do you suggest that get their attention openly? Let's swap out openly for effectively. How about that? What's your take there?
I think you have to speak to them in a language that they understand, right? And you have to recognize what their approach is, and you have to appeal to something very personal. If you think about how marketing is done these days, right? There's this whole notion of retargeting where if you've ever Googled, "I want a new canoe," a canoe ads follow you around the web for the rest of your life, it seems like. But there are ways now, because of Instagram and the data that it captures, and Facebook and the data that it captures, and other platforms and the data that they capture, to understand who people are, right? So I would say this is more prevalent in the millennial generation, but not unique to the millennial generation. So you've got to appeal to something very personal to them, what they like, or who they want to be, or what is their grand statement, or what drives them to succeed, or or to excel, right?
I'm going to completely steal that grand statement and put it on the back of a T-shirt, Greg. And if we have any Braves listening in today, your grand statement is to win the pennant. We're going to get past this card series, right, Will? Cards are looking great.
What is the magic number now?
I think the magic number's down to 6. And we've got a big series with the Phillies starting tonight. So go Braves here in the Supply Chain City. So next question comes from Jason. And Jason asks, can Curo be used for personal use, or is it best used for business use?
That's a really good question. Today, it's predominantly for business use. So to give you an example of how it's used, a major online retailer is our largest customer. And they use it because they're building hundreds of e-fulfillment facilities every year. And there are literally thousands of tasks that need to be done in that, done by multiple subcontractors who do the work. And they needed their project managers to be able to track that work. But we do see a world where that same technology, go there, do that, or go there, there's that opportunity. And Will and I have talked about this. Go there, here's that event, that you could use it in a very personal way. And, and it becomes sort of your personal assistant, where Will and I love to talk about this Billy Reed Festival, which is a hipster clothing designer, and he has a big concert party in Muscle Shoals. There's free advertising. He may not want it. But imagine a scenario where you're able to drop a pin on the map and say, hey, we're going to be at the Billy Reed Festival, the Brothers Haraway, one of Will's many bands. And we're going to be playing at the Billy Reed Festival. And then you open a dialogue with all of your followers and friends and whomever else, and they can coordinate on how they're going to get to the Billy Reed Festival and what time does Will go on and that sort of information. And again, because it's a tool about getting things done, I could see a lot of personal usage opportunities. Why go to Home Advisor and Angie's List and Thumbtack and Tackle to figure out if someone can put new shingles on your roof? Why not just go to this app and say, I want new shingles on my roof, and it goes out and figures out who can do it in your area, in your time frame, in your budget, all of those sorts of things. And I see that as a very applicable thing. So to answer your question, Jason, today it is a work application, but we have a great vision. We want to make a grand statement by making it eventually a solution that anyone can use.
And it seems like in today's world, technology and otherwise, there's a blurring of the lines between the personal side and the business side anyway.
There is.
Sure. We're using what was long considered personal apps for business and vice versa more and more than ever before.
Yeah,
right?
That's true. And as importantly, when I'm stopping off to get milk on my way home from the office, my wife can drop a pin and remind me to go to the cleaners and pick up.
Even Bigfoot can order a Domino's pizza by one of those little pins that you drop down.
Exactly right.
Great commercial by friends over at Domino's. So what's who would have thought would work in a Domino's ad within Spot Now Radio?
Who'd have thought Domino's would be repairing more roads than the government and allowing you to.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is right. Hey, root cause.
That's right.
All right. So next question comes from Sarah, and Sarah asks, what's the best way to communicate criticism to this generation of millennial workers? That's a great question.
Yeah.
And question you have to answer.
Yes, and that, you know what, I had to pause a second to think because I'm not sure I'm very good at communicating criticism. I am in supply chain tradition pretty direct. But I think with any criticism, you have to explain the context, right? And I prefer not to focus on the criticism, although I think one of my initial statements to one of my new employees once was to ask them what they thought we did. And when they explained what we did, I said, wrong. That was pretty good, wasn't it? That was maybe not the best, maybe not the best opening, but in the spirit of levity, sometimes you do that. But I think you have to explain what the misunderstanding is. I am a believer that if somebody hasn't delivered me what I have asked for, then I haven't communicated very well. And I think that that's always a safe bet. It's always safe to assume, right? I was taught many years ago, and I don't know who originally said this, assume noble intent, right? Assume that somebody wanted to get the job done right. They meant to do it well, right? And you have to assume that. And in that spirit, you have to say, look, I know that you meant to do this. Here's what you could do better next time to be more successful with that. And I think that's universal. I really do. I really believe, as I said, this generation in large part fears nothing. And they are unbelievably ambitious. And, I'm picturing two people in my office, my 36-year-old millennial who I am very direct with, and he is absolutely unconcerned with that, actually welcomes. I would argue that he kind of invites more abuse than I can put on him. But then our younger ones, you have to be a bit more sensitive with. And I think that's more a function of age and maturity than really anything generational.
So a follow-up question to that, because that was a good question from Sarah, is how do you find them giving feedback? I mean, we talked about the silent generation, and in some eras it was folks would see things and not were basically told not to say anything, right? In many ways, especially business. How do you find that playing out with the millennial generation?
Brutally. you get feedback openly, transparently, and in my case, very often plain language. And I think that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a mite hyperbolic, but then again, these are the times that we're in these days, right? There's so many things that are hyperbole these days. So we do a lot of active coaching around that particular point. It's not, maybe crisis isn't the right word, if that's the word that they've chosen, but very openly and very directly. And man, I love that. I love, say what you mean and mean what you say. We go through this when we hire new people in our company, we go through what it's like to work at Curo, what our core values are, what our higher purpose is, and honestly, we do a little bit of here's how you work with Greg.
Really?
Yes, I'm not above saying that I can be, I have a lot going on, right? But sometimes in my position, you're a bit of an enigma, and we expose that, to great measure. And I think that helps. That transparency up front helps.
And we all know transparency is really one of the big values of the millennial generation.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
It's one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of positive change institutionally and elsewhere. Well, Greg, appreciate your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I think this is a topic that we could dive into for a whole day or a whole week and still have more to discuss. So thank you for your time and perspective. We're going to kind of move into wrap-up mode here. We're going to make sure everyone has Greg's information. Greg welcomes, despite how busy he is, he welcomes the opportunity to compare notes, and I'm sure he'll happy to take any questions around Curo.
Yeah, you notice Twitter and Instagram are not up there.
Yeah, just notice that.
I'm welcoming input.
You're breaking
at my pace.
At your pace. Well, you can learn more about Curo at curoglobal.com. And, of course, you're going to have Greg's email information there. You can find him oftentimes on the speaking circuit, doing keynotes here and there, talking about all the different ways that we can make work happen easier and smarter, right?
Yep.
Great. All right. So let's talk about this. So speaking of making things easier, Supply Chain Now Radio, we have recently rolled out a text to subscribe. Now, earlier in the show, as we were coming on, Greg told me that texting is 5 years old. So showing this, maybe I'm way behind the times, but
it's okay.
We're trying to make it easier for our audience. So if you're a regular attendee and you get tired of registering on the one-off basis for the 3 or 5 questions that we ask for, hey, you can be auto-enrolled in all of our webinars by texting your email, texting supply chain to 42828, and we'll take it from there. This might make your life easier, especially if you're follow along on our webinars for your certification maintenance needs. So take advantage of that opportunity. We also want to talk about the Georgia Manufacturing Summit. So on October 10th, there's going to be over 800 professionals from across manufacturing and supply chain space here in Atlanta. We have a great opportunity to lead, again, the Trends to Track in Supply Chain panel event, where we're going to be featuring Corinne Bursa with Agility, John Holly with Kumho Tires Georgia, Brent Rogers with Southwire, and Chris Jones with Descartes. So to learn more on that great event, all-day event, check out GeorgiaManufacturingAlliance.com. All right, a few final points here. If there's anything else we can do, any questions you've got on what you heard today, you can reach out to me at evp@apexatlanta.org. We've got upcoming sessions. Clearly, we've tackled the Engaging Millennials session. Great session here today. We've got sessions coming up on using big data in demand planning, supply chain transformation, much more. You can learn more about each of those sessions at apexatlanta.org. We just finalized a great session called the Apex Regional Supply Chain Leadership Forum. On October 19th and 20th, it's going to be at Georgia Tech. We're going to be featuring site tours, networking, some great professional development opportunities. We're capped at about 75 attendees, and we're about halfway there, roughly. So that's open to Apex members and non-members. Come out and join us. If you need more information on that, send an email to info@apexatlanta.org. We talked about the Apex certifications. Well, Apex Atlanta is really excited about a new direction we're taking with our education. We're hosting our CSCP and CLTD boot camps at Georgia Tech. The second round comes up in December. And if you want more information on that, shoot us an email as well. Hey, Greg, to put you on the spot here, before we conclude today's session,
sure.
Any final thoughts on your end?
No, I'm kidding. No, I think, look, engagement is a key word. So go out and, interact actively, learn first, answer second. Those are key rules that we use, regardless of who you are in our organization, right? Just recognize that in the end, because let me assure you that the millennial and the forthcoming generations recognize this, that in the end, we are all just people.
Yep.
So it's not about a generalization across across a generation or anything like that. It's really about creating a workforce, a workplace, a world that is, accretive to the goodness of all.
Yep, and creating opportunities for everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
Great point. Well, big thanks to our guest, Greg White with Curo, for this, I think, very interesting presentation and with lots of valuable and practical insight. That's the thing I've liked about these types of sessions. We make it practical, right? It's not all
You've got to be able to do something with it.
That's right.
Yep.
Big thanks to our sponsors again, Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. I should also give Will Haraway over at Backbeat Marketing, again, big high five for helping to make today's episode happen. Will's a good friend and colleague that's doing some big things in supply chain too. He also, we twist his arm. He serves on our Apex Atlanta Executive Advisory Board, new member there. You can check him out at backbeatmarketing.com, right? Great. Of course, big thank you to our audience for participating on behalf of Supply Chain Now Radio. This is Scott Luton concluding today's episode. Have a wonderful weekend. Go Braves. We hope to reconnect with you again real soon. And thanks, everybody.
All right.